to begin by reminding you of a famous saying. It goes like this: please don't shoot the messenger just because you don't like the message. I am not responsible for the conditions that we face as a nation today, but I am not going to sugarcoat what the situation is. My guess is you already know it in your hearts and in the backs of your minds. What will the United States do? Continue its denial of what's going on? Threaten, as they have, China with war, despite the fact that China has nuclear weapons and the Russians do too, and they are now allied in good part because of the United States? Or are we going to sit down and work something out? Are we going to tell the American people, honestly, our empire is declining? The next one looks to be Chinese. Or if it isn't Chinese, it's going to be a multinational replacement for the kind of dominance that the Persians or the Dutch or the British or the Americans operated. The world is changing very fundamentally. Mr. Trump's economic proposals, whatever else you think of them, are economically incoherent. It's great advertising. I'm protecting you with my walls. It's wonderful. But when it comes now to governing, it's impossible, and it's a bad joke. And the whole world is watching. And while it's watching this bad joke unfold, the gap between the United States and the G7 on one hand, and the People's Republic of China and the BRICS on the other, deepens. The United States' effort to stop, block, undercut China have failed. Been doing it now for 15 years. Started big time under Obama. It doesn't work. It doesn't work. And so the question is, what? Do you keep doing it? Mr. Trump won the election because he positioned himself with dramatic gestures, the sort favored by Madison Avenue advertisers. And the two gestures were, I am the great protector. Mr. Trump understood far better than the Democrats that people feel attacked, undermined, frightened, scared, worried for themselves and their children, as well they should be. They glimpse fearfully where things are going. They want to be protected from it all. So he put himself forward as the great protector. And his two images were walls, the image of a protector. He's going to put a steel wall at the southern border to protect us against the invasion of the immigrants. And then he's going to put another wall, a tariff wall, to protect us against the evil Chinese. Very powerful images, very successful. But in terms of economics, total incoherent nonsense. We have 10 to 12 million undocumented immigrants. That's according to the Department of Homeland Security. We are a population of 330 million Americans. Do the math. 10 to 12 of the poorest people in the country, those immigrants, are not the explanation for the economic difficulties of this rich country of 330 million people. The very idea of that is ridiculous. An undergraduate who wrote such a thing would be called in by their teacher and told, try to think through what you're saying before you say it. If Mr. Trump now deports 5 or 10 of these 10 to 12 million immigrants, which he has threatened to do, there will be consequences. Why? Because undocumented immigrants are the most abused of our working class. An undocumented immigrant who asks for his pay on Friday afternoon and is told by his employer, sorry, I don't have the money, has no recourse. He can't go to the police. He's an undocumented immigrant. He doesn't want to get anywhere near any office of the government. He will not complain. He can't. He's like a slave. And that's how they're treated. The construction industry in this country is a major employer. employer. If it doesn't have undocumented employees, it'll have to pay Americans. And you know what? It'll have to pay them a hell of a lot more than they're paying the terrified undocumented immigrant. And that will mean the cost of construction will zoom up. And you know what that does? It worsens our inflation. Mr. Trump either can't do it for that reason, or he will produce an inflation that will overnight turn him from savior to demon in the eyes of his own followers. Then there's the second wall, the tariff wall. Let me remind everyone what a tariff is. It's just a tax. It's the name given to a particular kind of tax, namely the tax charged to an American importer when that person brings something produced overseas into the United States to be sold. It means Mr. Trump, a Republican who is against taxes, is proposing an enormous tax increase. And while saying he's hitting the Chinese with a tariff, it's not the Chinese who pay for tariffs. It's Americans. The American importer will pay much more, and that person will then charge more to the consumer, you and me. And you know what that means? An inflation, which he can't have. Yet he proposes these, counting on the American people to be into denial, not to interrogate any of this, to sit there and have debates as if there's something to debate. The debate is a distraction. It's a way of not dealing with your problem because you're too frightened of letting it be debated, lest it go where it might bite you. And we are run by a community of businessmen and women in charge of our corporations, including our mass media, who are not going to do it. And our job as Americans is to stop behaving childishly in this game of thinking that the problems I've barely sketched don't have to be worried about, because we can continue to act as if we were in charge in the way we were in the 1960s and 70s. We aren't. Nothing like that. The war in Ukraine is lost. For those of you who don't keep track, is over, except for signing the documents. Russia won, Ukraine and the West lost. The war in Gaza isolates the United States. Indeed, what historians will say when they look back on this time will be that the United States undertook to isolate and neutralize the dangers after World War II. First in the Soviet Union, then in China, then in the global socialist world, nowadays in what are euphemistically called authoritarian societies. But the end result of the plan to isolate the rest of the world going through these efforts was to isolate the United States itself. We and Israel are standing all alone in that part of the world. And the Europeans, whose world is collapsed, they're economically a basket case. And you know why? What the major reason is that Europe is gone as a player? Because they relied on two things: exporting to China, which the Chinese don't need, and cheap energy from Russia, which they have turned away from. So the energy costs make a European production uncompetitive. They have to pay too much for energy, and they can't sell in China the way they once did. They're done. Germany, which used to be the engine of European growth, is now the laggard dragging it down. It really is extraordinary, folks, that what you have thought about and assumed is now over. And it takes courage, but also a sense of realism to say, now we are going to talk honestly about our situation and try to find a livable way forward. The alternative, well, I don't want to spell it out. You can figure it out for yourself, but I hope you will not hold against me that I have told you how this situation really is, rather than comforting you with more denial. But if I have failed, which I understand I may well have, then I have good news for you. If you want to wallow in denial, just turn on the radio and the television, and this evening it will all go go away as you get told that the great issues of our time are those carefully excluding everything I have told you. We might have not been talking about this now. It might have gone on for another 2 or 3 decades. It really might have. But there were two things that bring it to a head now, and that suggest to me it's not going away. And there's nothing Mr. Trump basically can do about this. The first is that the Chinese, and the Indians are catching up, found a way to achieve much faster economic growth than the United States, which meant that the Chinese catching up, which could have and should have in many ways taken longer, has been compressed into a much shorter historical period. And the Chinese are literally discovering each day what their enormous industrial situation permits them to do. And that accelerates the decline of the dollar beyond what I think it might otherwise have been. The rapid economic growth and the inability of the United States, at least so far, to copy that, being held back by the ideology of the primacy of the private sector and the quote-unquote inefficiency of the government, limiting the role of the government, and doing this even though it's contradicted by other things that Trump is doing. He is a Republican. He is part of that tradition, and that tradition precludes the United States from copying China. They make a virtue out of it. We won't go in that authoritarian direction. But again, that's childish. They're not going to catch up to China if they don't, and they will be falling further behind, including the dollar, unless they do. And there is no escape from that situation. And finally, the other thing that made it go faster is this war in Ukraine, which, couldn't have been foreseen, or maybe it should have been, and I didn't, and most of the economists I know didn't. But that war has produced a rapid acceleration in the whole BRICS phenomena, and one of the ideas of BRICS has always been to not necessarily do away with the global role of the dollar. That's really not relevant. The dollar will be important as long as the United States is as big a player in the world economy as it still is. But it will diminish, and that's for sure. And the BRICS, with the consequence of what's happening, and I say that even before dealing with today's tariff increase on India by Mr. Trump, but you could see all of this coming. This only makes the decline of the dollar happen even faster. And I think you can therefore see Mr. Trump promised to protect the dollar, and the dollar has really gone down sharply, literally, from the day he was inaugurated on the 20th of January to my speaking with you right now. It's down, depending on which currency you compare it to, but it's down 8 to 12%, and that in a short half-year period is a very serious comment on the wisdom of him protecting the dollar. That's not happening. And the longer this continues, the more and more the rest of the world will make do without trading with the United States. It's not reliable as a place to export to. That's the tariff problem. And it's not reliable as a place to do business if you would need to import anything because of the tariffs. And inside the United States, you are creating a globally uncompetitive economy. Now, that'll take years to play itself out, but I don't see anything contradicting that. Nothing at all. The advantage the United States had in high technology, that has now been compromised by the Chinese demonstrating they can do pretty much what we can do, and they can do it with or without cooperation from the United States. The Huawei Corporation itself has demonstrated that from the time that the United States arranged for the arrest of the CEO's daughter in Canada to the present, when the Huawei is out competing American. You're looking looking at. And the results? Look at Apple. Apple, to escape the problem of being in China, moved to India, which is now turning out to be as big or maybe bigger problem for Apple than China was. But therein lies a lesson everyone is learning by looking at Apple. If Mr. Trump's goal was to move production from the rest of the world to the United States, the herky-jerky, up and down, temporary delay, these are all reasons not to be productive inside the United States, because you have no idea what the conditions are into which you would do what? Spend the money, spend the time to move production from overseas into the United States under these circumstances. And I'm not even talking about a society splitting apart in which half of the country sees Mr. Trump and his program as a kind of fascism. That word is being used often enough now that it ought to worry any responsible CEO about moving your, for me, this makes as much sense as making a big relocation decision to go into Ukraine. What? No one is that stupid. And I don't think you're going to see Mr. Trump even talking about moving production here, because even the few examples he's able to point to are if you look at them closely, very flaky. They have big numbers, but it's over a 10-year period. Mr. Trump will be gone as president long before that, and so will all the people making these promises. They mean nothing. They are theatric to help Mr. Trump play the game because he can't do the reality. What I have to try to get across to people is that for the first time, the notion that we are on top and dominant is under attack here. Millions of people don't believe it anymore, are doubtful, are dubious. I would, to be crude, half the population is beginning to realize, some more, some less, that period may be over. But the other half, the half of Mr. Trump, is outraged by this idea. Even more outraged that half of Americans are beginning to worry about this. They see all of that as a failure of nerve, a failure of courage, a failure to recognize your responsibility if you are the dominant power in the world. It isn't a recognition that you aren't. It's a demonstration that, thank God, we don't have any more of those people leading us. We now have a gung-ho American who's going to tell Mr. Modi what to do, and who's going to make sure, because you know what? Those namby-pamby liberals in America, that's what we call the left half of the country. They are the ones who stabbed us in the back. We don't have that language yet, but it's coming. And you Europeans, you did too. You took advantage of us. You did this. You did that. They'll find something that was worked out at some point, and it will be for them another great betrayal of the heritage of the United States, which is to govern. And they don't want to hear about anything else, and they certainly don't want to hear about liberal values or a rules-based order. For them, that's all the language of people unwilling and unable to use the power that the United States still has and should use for the benefit of the whole world. This mentality has to be understood. Otherwise, you will not understand how they can treat Mexico or Canada or Scandinavia or Holland or any other country the way they are. Perfect. You have all gone along with ripping off the big, powerful country, and now you don't want to pay the price of having to adjust your bad behavior. Whatever Mr. Trump says, it changes so often, and it is so much the product of the immediate moment and what reporter in what situation is asking him what difficult question, and his mind is probably on the Jeffrey Epstein problem that haunts him here at home and all the other issues. I wouldn't take much of a cue from this man. His function, and in that he's like most American politicians, politicians these days, his function is overwhelmingly to distract from the bad news. And they do that in two ways. The Democrats by pretending it isn't there, and the Republicans by pretending they have the economic power of the United States that it had in the 1960s and 70s, and that it hasn't lost all of that, and therefore is in a position, even if it admits that there's a problem, to quickly fix that problem by punishing the bad other countries that caused that problem. And so, he's busy blaming and punishing and acting as though he's in a position to do much about it. So for me, and for people who think this the way I'm about to describe, we look at the problem of the dollar, and indeed of many other problems facing the United States, as falling under the heading of the very kinds of problems that you would expect in a declining empire. That is, in a global empire past its peak, and now in the very unhappy position of having to face slowly, relentlessly, that it doesn't have the power and it doesn't have the wealth it once had. And it can't solve these problems in the ways it once did. And so it needs, first of all, to face the basic problem, which we do not do here in the United States at all. I mean, if you remember last November, we had a presidential election in which three candidates, Biden, Harris, and Trump, never uttered one word about a declining empire or a declining U.S. capitalism declining because its empire is gone. The very same people who could and did look at Great Britain and say the sad condition of that society and of that economy has more than a little to do with the disappearance of the British Empire. They can say that, they can show that, but they cannot allow even the question to be applied to the United States, as if in some bizarre way, never specified, all other empires that are gone mean nothing because the American empire endures in some magical way. The American capitalists participated and accelerated the decline when they made the decision about the same time that the U.S. went off the gold standard to move production to Asia, but in any case out of the United States. The development of the jet engine and the development of the internet made it possible to supervise production as easily in China as before you did it in California, or as easily in Sao Paulo, Brazil, as before you did it in Chicago. And so the wages being much lower there, those economies being desperate to bring jobs to their country, the American corporations saw enormous profit and moved out hundreds of billions of dollars of investment abroad, crucial to the development of the Brazilian economy, the Indian economy, the Chinese economy. So the United States, which, by the way, sometimes likes to take credit for the economic development of China, and it deserves some credit. To take it away from the Chinese is childish, but that's what passes for politics in our country. But there's a grain of truth. It's partly what American corporations and European corporations and Japanese corporations did. But the end result is all of that development outside of the United States would sooner or later mean that the United States dollar wasn't necessary, did not need to play this role. And then big countries like China and India and Brazil began to learn from their own economists the privileges and the benefits you get if your currency is used around the world. And they wanted some of that for themselves, which again is what I mean by a declining empire facing demands that are natural as other economies grow.
I wanted to ask you, what is happening with the European economies? Is there, as you said, there's a lot of self-harm, but do you see any pathway to recovery, or is it just downhill from here?
No, the only recovery I see, though I could imagine, so I agree with everything you said, would be a recognition that they must use their size, their wealth, the fruit of 5 or 6 centuries of colonialism and capitalism to carve out an independent path. They've got to break their connection to the United
States, it is the end for them. And more so now. Mr. Trump is able to make a joke about Canada being the 51st state. That joke will be extended to Europe in a while, and not a long while either. There is no sense here that Europe has any role to play whatsoever anywhere, except perhaps to pay for weapons that can be used in Ukraine. So Mr. Trump looks good to his base that he isn't spending U.S. tax dollars on the Ukraine war, which the American taxpayer does not want to do anymore, but is spending European money. And if the Europeans allow this, I noticed Mr. Merz, when he pushed his bond program through, talked about the boost to the German economy, but is now saying that they will be buying American weapons. For me, it's beyond words. If you don't buy your own, then what are you doing? What are you going to be? An outpost for the American military? A place to store missiles before they get shipped over to Ukraine or wherever else? You're not going to defeat the Russians. It's ridiculous. Napoleon couldn't. Hitler couldn't. Mr. Starmer? You must be kidding. Nobody. The United States can't do it. The world is a very, very different place. Europe is rich. Europe is big. Europe should be playing a big role, but it's got to unify and it's got to cut the umbilical cord with the United States, or else it has no. Watch it, and it's not just what they do, Glenn. It's watching the speech that von der Leyen or the NATO head, when they talk, the United States literally kicks them in the nose and they talk sweetly about the United States. What? They announce a big tariff and they say, well, we will retaliate, and then they don't. It's even worse than simply caving in. This performance that we won't even listen to our own words in this situation. We are so determined to go with the United States against Russia. It strikes me as so sad. And I look at Jean-Luc Mélenchon in France. I look at Sarah Wagenknecht in Germany, and I'm wondering, are these people going to be able to come up with a way of doing that, or will it go to the Alternative für Deutschland or for Le Pen and those people? Because the rest of their political system is simply a politics of we're not either one of those, which the people already know, and that's not a program. There is a last point I would stress. For a number of technical reasons, the consequence of declaring economic war on the whole world, which is Mr. Trump's policy, with tariffs, with trade arrangements, with sanctions, that's really all part of it. For technical reasons, it has not yet hit the American economy the way I believe it will. Of course, I can be wrong, but I've been doing this all my adult life, watching the U.S. economy. What I see coming, and I mean it in the second half of this year, so we're talking in the second half of 2025, you're going to begin to see serious signs of recession coupled with serious signs of inflation. And this is going to put difficulties for Mr. Trump far greater than anything he has seen so far. And the labor movement is moving here. The political climate is not good for him. So even his own base is more and more divided. They don't like what they're doing with the health care. Kennedy is a disaster. They don't like the level of persecution of immigrants is being overdone and has now produced a backlash. There really is widespread horror over what is going on in Gaza and Mr. Trump's. There's lots of speculation that he has to support Netanyahu because the Israeli police included Mr. Epstein and that they have material he cannot risk being. And again, you never know with those things and you never know what to believe, but that is now being spoken, including by many who were his strongest supporters who are talking like this. You're watching disintegration. At this point, I would say to you, it's no longer a question, will he disintegrate? Now the question is, he is disintegrating. Will he be able to find some way to slow this, to stop it, to reverse it? Is there some issue, some program? That's what he has to find. He hasn't found it yet. So the showboating about India and China, so far it has not had the domestic consequences. But we have millions of Americans who are now beginning to buy to the two biggest retail moments in America before the school year starts now and then before Christmas. And so we're about to head in, and if the prices go up, then there'll be